Let me ask Ambassador Anil Sooklal to talk about, South Africa is the chair of the African Union. And the African Union is going to play a major role in steering Africa's post-COVID recovery and the ongoing efforts to combat the pandemic. We may like to focus briefly on what South Africa as chair of AU is doing in this context. And number two, he should also look at, given his portfolio as his, role as South Africa's BRICS Sherpa and IPSA, the role of multilateral or plurilateral in combating the pandemic. Over to you, Professor Sooklal.
Thank you, Manish. Let me firstly congratulate you and India and the World Magazine for hosting this very important event, coinciding with Africa Day. Happy Africa Day to all of our colleagues, and Eid Mubarak to our Muslim sisters and brothers. Let me start, before I come to your question, to also welcome and congratulate Ambassador Chabra into his new position, and I look forward to working closely with you, having worked closely with Ambassador Tirumurthy recently. I think the pandemic is a pause moment for the entire global community. It's also a great leveler. It doesn't matter whether you are a large or a small country, rich or poor, or from which part of the world you have come from. We are all equally affected. And I think this year is an important year for the global community as we mark the 75th anniversary of the founding of the UN. But for Africa, it is equally a seminal year, as it is the year in which the African Continental Free Trade Agreement was going to be operationalized. 1st July was actually the date for operationalize the agreement. South Africa is in the fortunate position of having the privilege and honor to chair the African Union for the second time. We chaired it when we transitioned from the OAU to the AU in 2002 in Durban, and once again we assumed the chairship in February this year. And President Ramaphosa at the summit in Addis on the 9th of February this year outlined the key priorities that South Africa will focus on. And the focus has been on continuity. He spoke about focusing on the issue of economic integration of the continent, the political integration of the continent, fully operationalizing the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the advancement of women, especially women's economic empowerment and entrepreneurship, promoting the values of good governance and democracy, working closely with the African Union and the UN, and of course promoting peace and security on the continent by emphasizing the AU's focus on silencing the guns. These were the key priorities outlined by President Ramaphosa. South Africa was due to host an extraordinary summit at the end of May, 2 summits back to back, one focusing on silencing of the guns and the other on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Of course, because of the challenge of COVID-19, these have been postponed, but they are still on track. I think Ambassador Chabra has outlined in great detail the deep cooperation between India and Africa on various levels. I think it's important to keep that at the back of the mind. But it's also important to understand that over the past 3 or so decades, Africa has entered into a number of key partnerships, the India-Africa partnership being one of those. And we have been privileged to have witnessed 3 of those summits. I was a participant in the December 2015 summit in Delhi, and we are busy preparing for the 4th summit. But perhaps what we need to ask ourselves in this period of reflection forced upon us by the tsunami of the pandemic is, how can we do things slightly differently? And how can Africa and India maximize this partnership going forward post-COVID? There are a number of fault lines that have been exposed on the international front, be it political, economic, and other areas, that has shown us our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities. Most for the African continent, I think it has been fortuitous that we have put forward this template of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, and it has been most timeless. It's an opportunity for us in this moment of difficulty. As Ambassador Chabra has pointed out, the predictions in terms of contraction of the global economy and the African economy is going to be quite severe. And as was pointed out at the G20 summit, Africa is going to need a lot of assistance. We'd also like to thank India for the assistance they have been providing to the African continent, South Africa included, in the telecon between Prime Minister Modi and President Ramaphosa in his capacity as AU chair. They spoke extensively about this cooperation and what more can be done in this field. I think as Prime Minister Modi outlined the key guiding principles in the India-Africa partnership at the 2015 summit, and he echoed this further during his state visit to Uganda when he addressed the Ugandan parliament. What is needed now is for us to unpack each of these guiding principles and synergize it in terms of Agenda 2063. There's a great deal of complementarity here. Both India and Africa accounts for almost 1/3 of global population. But what is our combined share of global trade? Under 10%. Africa's share is between 2 to 3%. In this day and age, this is a serious slight in terms of how global trade is conducted. And we need to really look this again and what can be done differently to ensure that Africa and India become part of the mainstream. One of the fault lines that has been shown quite severely during this COVID-19 impact is the disruption of global supply chains. And Africa is not very much part of the global supply chain and the global value chains. We are much on the margins. How can we become part of the mainstream? And Ambassador Chabra has outlined several things that are being done in this partnership. I think this partnership can be characterized into 4 key areas. How Africa and India can work on the peace and security front in collaboration. Much is being done already. On the economic and the social front, and on the people-to-people front. There are a number of key areas. When you were reading out the statement of the Dean, and the Dean was appealing to Make in Africa, I think it's not just about Make in Africa or Make in India. It is about how we can jointly produce together for the mutual benefit of both India and Africa. And I think there are tremendous opportunities, and we have to look at the niche areas where we can add value to this relationship. And Ambassador Chabra has outlined several areas, especially the pharmaceutical, the medicine field, the ICT area in the context of the 4th Industrial Revolution, the agro sector, the capacity and skills development, remembering that both Africa and India have the most youthful population. This is a major advantage for us if it is harnessed properly. And I think, India can partner with Africa in terms of empowering our youth, in terms of skills and capacity building, and of course, in terms of manufacturing. Where we don't centralize manufacturing to 1 or 2 centers of the world, and in times of disruption like this, we become casualties. We need to relook the model of the linear model of value chain supply, of producing, using, and discarding. We need to have a more secular model in terms of production. And I think this will also assist in terms of the impact on the environment and how we can jointly collaborate in addressing the challenges of climate change. And I think, India and Africa can work closely together. So I think it's a moment for us to relook these partnerships. The template is there in terms of what we've agreed on, but how can we do things slightly differently so that as we speak of empowering Africa and Africa becoming more independent and becoming a center for manufacturing and part of the global value chain, supply chain. What role can India play in partnering with us for the joint benefit? The other important partnership that we need to focus on between India and Africa, as was pointed out, over the past 2 or 3 decades, since the launch of the African Union, democracy has taken root, good governance has taken root. Africa has shown leadership in the continent itself. And these values are central, the fundamental values of human rights, the African Charter on People and Human Rights being an example. How can we build on this on the global stage? The whole United Nations system is paralyzed at the present time. We saw the attempts at the United Nations Security Council now to put a halt to global conflicts during the time of the pandemic. This didn't fly. It just shows how paralyzed the UN system is. As we celebrate 75 years, what is it we are celebrating? Because you still have an Africa that is marginalized from the Security Council. The reform process is 20 years down the line, and where are we? So within the context of BRICS and IPSA, I think Africa and India must push the reform agenda of the multilateral institutions, especially the Security Council. And I think, we need to collaborate and see how we create a more inclusive global society that does not marginalize Africa and other parts of the world. I think I will leave it here at this point. Thank you.